Jan Pot Kivanak, everyone. My name is Holly Lund, and besides being a student of linguistics here at Western, I also study Russian and German. So naturally, when we got to choose one language to focus on for an entire quarter in syntax, I went with Hungarian, which is really hard and not related to either. This inherent dissimilarity reminds me of an old anecdote from the world of astrophysics. As the story goes, Enrico Fermi, one of the leading researchers in the search for extraterrestrial life, got increasingly frustrated with the lack of contact from outer space. So frustrated that he stormed down into the lunchroom one day and impatiently blurted, "Where are they?" A question to which Hungarian-born physicist Leo Szilard answered, "They're already here. They just call themselves Hungarians." So for the next 8 minutes or so, I plan on introducing you to some of Hungarian's alien characteristics in the form of syntactic word order, emphasis, and possession. Hungarian is not a language isolate. It's the member of the Uralic family and is related to other languages such as Finnish, Estonian, Sami, Mari, Komi, Erdmurt, Hanti, and Mansi, most of which are located in Siberia. One of the things that makes it so strange in our mildly Indo-Eurocentric minds is the fact that Hungarian doesn't seem to have any set word order. And I don't know what happened here. These are supposed to be next to each other, so I apologize for that. Traditionally, word order is described in the placement of the subject, the object, and the verb. English is an SVO language, or subject-verb-object. Welsh would be a VSO language, or verb-subject-object, and Latin would be an SOV language, subject-object-verb. In Hungarian, as you can see, we seem to have any of these word orders, with SOV usually stated as being the neutral option. However, in previous studies, as many as 40% of sentences as judged as neutral by native speakers didn't have this position. In recent years, a better outline has emerged, stating Hungarian word order as topic, focus, verb, other stuff. When doing my preliminary research for my original essay, one of the things I frequently came across online were the forums on Duolingo for learning Hungarian. In these online chats, native speakers who were helping learners never described building the sentence as the aforementioned SOV order. Instead, they would always describe constructing it around the verb. So what does this mean? Well, if you've studied Japanese, what is going on? If you study Japanese, you're familiar with the concept of topicalization. This is the process through which one piece of the clause is taken and emphasized as the most important piece of information. In Japanese, you do this with a suffix. In English, you do this with intonation, or sometimes through movement. In Hungarian, this is done by taking the piece to be emphasized and putting it at the very beginning of the clause, and it happens a lot. Thus, if we look at the examples we have here, the normal neutral translation would be something as, "The train hit John." But we could take either John or the train being the subject and John being the object, and move either of them to the front. If we take John and move him to the front, as we see in the first example, the translation would be something as for John, the train hit him," where you're emphasizing John. If we took a train, as we see in the second example, and moved it to the front, the translation would be something such as for the train, it hit John. So you can see two different mildly altered translations coming out based on the order of the words. This can happen to any piece of the clause under the right circumstances. The focus position lies between the topic and the verb, and it's reserved for new information or information that needs to be corrected. Thus, if we knew that the train hit something, but we didn't know it was John, or we didn't know it was a person, John would go into the focus position. If we knew that John was hit by something, but we didn't know what it was, or we thought it was a different type of transportation vehicle, like a hot air balloon, then the train would go into the focus position. In spoken Hungarian, the topic is marked by rising intonation, and the focus is marked by falling intonation. So there are a few other cues when you don't have one or the other present. Other stuff refers to things such as locational objects, adverbs, subjects, objects, and indirect objects that aren't considered super important. They usually come at the end of the sentence, but they can also be topicalized or focused when they need to be. Okay. One of the other things that seems really alien to many Indo-European speakers is the Hungarian determiner phrase. Salvador just gave us a crash course in X-bar theory, but for those of you who are a little confused, it's not as scary as it sounds. This is a really basic tree structure. In English, our trees are head initial, meaning that the main lexile information comes to the left of the internal tree. In English, we have three determiners, the, or an, and they lie in the head, which is located here. Here's the. The appropriate noun comes to the right as an NP or noun phrase complement, and you can see the noun itself further down in its own head. In English, the possessive pronouns, my, his, hers, yours, theirs, ours, and the possessive s suffix also live in the head of the determiner phrase, as you can see here. In Hungarian, this is a little more complicated. At first, everything looks really Englishy and pretty simple. If we just look at the determiner phrases, here we can see the or an. And we see that they come before the noun, to the right as we would expect if we were basing it off of our English structure. However, if you look at possessive phrases, as we see here, automatically things change. Rather than surfacing to the left of the noun as we would expect, they come to the right as suffixes. I mean, from this point, we could theorize that perhaps the determiner phrase doesn't have a set headedness and that it can flip-flop across the noun. However, since we don't see this in any other Hungarian phrasal categories, this theory doesn't really hold water. To make matters even worse, these little snippets are ungrammatical, which you can tell by the stars. In Hungarian, in order to have a grammatically correct possessive phrase, you also require a definite determiner, as you can see here. In English, the equivalent would be something such as my the dog or his the windmill. So how do you build these in Hungarian? Well, you take the, followed by the noun, followed by the appropriate possessive pronoun. But how would we draw a tree for something like this? Well, we have two determiner phrases with different headedness? That doesn't hold well with X-bar theory, and it would be really hard for a language learner to grasp. Luckily, there is a solution. Linguist Katalin Kish, one of the leading experts in the field of Hungarian linguistics, proposes the existence of a possessive phrase. This phrase, as you can see here, lies between the determiner phrase and the noun phrase in the internal structure. The possessive phrase is head final rather than head initial, meaning the main lexical information comes to the right of the tree rather than the left. This is why we see possessive pronouns surfacing as suffixes rather than as prefixes. If we take our previous data and we plug it into these trees, it's kind of sloppy, I know. We see that it produces the correct grammatical output every time. We have the definite article coming to the left, followed by the noun, followed by the possessive pronoun to the right, as we would expect. In English, we wouldn't really have a need for a separate possessive phrase, since our possessive pronouns and our determiners both fall easily to the left of the noun. They also cannot occur at the same time, supporting the idea that they mentally live in the same spot. However, in Hungarian, the existence of a separate possessive phrase makes sense when one considers child language acquisition. The thing that makes children so adept at learning language is that they're so good at recognizing patterns. Thus, if a child consistently heard possessive pronouns coming after the noun rather than before, they would have no reason to group them together with noun initial determiners. Thus, they could exist at the same time. This would provide for a structure with extra nodes, as we saw in the previous tree. And it would also be a structure that English children would have no need for. I think that's everything, so thank you all so much. Barmy Curtis, any questions?
I have a tiny one. Can you go back to that last slide?
I can try. This one.
So how come you can't put your possessive head on the left-hand side, and you've got headed just the same way all the way through all your categories?
Because if this was here, and it became before the noun phrase, then the suffix would surface before the noun as a prefix.
But the noun could raise to it and attach to it.
That is possible. This is just the structure KISS proposed, so I haven't looked into other possible things in the literature.
Yes.
Emily?
The Koreans might join the Hungarians, or might be from a neighboring planet. It's also possible to use a determiner, at least redundantly, with a possessive.
Very.
My dad, dog, or my the fish.
Is it possible in Hungarian for the possessive to change positions?
No, the possessive in this form always surfaces after the noun. However, there is another form of possession that uses the dative case, which I didn't look into. But normally when you're just doing like his leg, your book, my house, this is how you'll see it.
I don't know anything about Hungarian, but like, do the possessive pronouns also like need determiners?
Yeah, these are the possessive pronouns. And so they come with
Well,
the determiners.
Like mine.
I'm not sure, I don't speak Hungarian, so. Anyone else? I have to look into it more.
Yeah. All right, thanks.
Thank you.